The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. With few exceptions, but this is page 176. With few exceptions, most Native American cultures did not have our notions as part of their collective mythos. Instead of the story that we're separate from creation and born to dominate it, these older cultures held a different view of the place of humans in the order of creation. They believe we are part of the world. We are made of the same flesh as other animals. We eat the same plants. We share the same air, water, soil, and food with every other life form on the planet. We are born into life by the same means as other mammals, and when we die, like them, we become part of the soil that will nourish future generations. They also believe it is our destiny to cooperate with the rest of creation. Every life form has its special purpose in the grand ecosystem, and all are to be respected, they believed. Each animal and plant has its own unique intelligence and spirit. We are permitted to compete with other plants and animals, but we may not wantonly destroy them. All life is absolutely as sacred as human life. Although hunting and killing for food are part of nature's order, when we do so, it must be done with respect and thankfulness. Older cultures are most often cooperators, not dominators. There are human cultures who do not engage in the destruction of the world. They demonstrate that destruction and domination are not an inevitable part of human nature. Prior to the emergence of younger cultures about 7,000 years ago, the anthropological record shows that not one culture believed itself to be separate from and superior to nature. We find the remnants of these older cultures in tribal people around the world, such as the San, the Kogi, the Ik of Uganda, the Navajo, the Hopi, the Cree, the Ojibwa, living in harmony with the world around them, the people around them, and seeing all life as sacred. The San Bushmen don't even qualify as Stone Age, since they've never used stone implements, only tools made from wood. And yet they were successfully pursuing their way of life 40,000 years before Aristotle, and they still are. They leave behind few traces, as they are such masters of resource management. That's sustainability. And contrary to the stories of our culture, it was and is often a happy and comfortable life. When we lived like that thousands of years ago, we enjoyed cradle-to-grave security. The tribe took care of itself. We cared for one another. If anybody had food, everybody had food. If anybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent, everybody had a diseased child or an infirm parent. The measure of wealth in such societies was security. Mediums of exchange like money were unnecessary. The idea of hoarding food or other things was unthinkable because everybody was responsible for everybody. Our ancient ancestors lived in the way of all other cooperator societies in nature, but be they the society of wolves or chimpanzees or prairie dogs, they looked out for one another. Our ancestors, people like you and me of all races and all continents, lived like this all over the world for 40 to 200,000 years, depending on whose archaeology you accept. And then there were eruptions among traditional cultures. In some parts of the world, people began to move away from their hunting and gathering lifestyle by experimenting with agriculture. This created more efficient food production, thus increasing their numbers and giving some people the ability to hoard food, the beginning of what we call wealth. Then a subgroup of the agriculturalists began experimenting with a new cultural idea of coercive or forced evangelism, of bringing others into their culture in a way that had never been done before. Their gods told them that if they couldn't evangelize others, then they should utterly destroy them. They were a very few, probably not more than a dozen tribes, which arose out of the tens of thousands of tribes that populated the planet. And this small number of tribes proceeded to wipe out and displace and destroy the thousands of other tribes who were living in a sustainable, peaceful, and connected to nature way. They left the garden and began to create dominating city-states and then empires. They were the first people infected with Wetiko, the origin of our younger culture. And because of this, they had become more efficient at increasing their own numbers. They had more sunlight under their own personal control. Of course, there was a price to pay for this. While the San, Kogi, Ik, and other native peoples may spend less than 2 to 4 hours a day gathering food and attending to the needs of life, and do to this day, by the way, in younger culture societies, this balance was radically shifted as average people must work longer and harder just to survive. Those who were the dominating individuals in the culture, however, could live luxuriously and work less and less. So for every person who only worked an hour or two a day, another person would have to work 4 or 8 or 10 hours a day or more. Without massive exploitation of resources or theft from others, for every person with 10 times as much wealth, 10 people must have only 1/10 as much. Social and economic classes were born, and the first governments came into being to define, order, and control the socioeconomic structure and help the wealthy maintain and increase their riches. Whether they knew it or not, these governments, mostly kingdoms in the early days, transmitted younger culture values to all citizens, rich and poor. The power brokers of this time programmed the consciousness of their subjects, just as our governments, educational institutions, and mass media do today. Nobody knows what brought about the first eruption of Wetiko cultural insanity, but logic suggests it was most likely happened in places where food resources were only cyclically abundant. For example, the Tlingit and Weda Native American tribes of the Pacific Northwest and the area around Vancouver Island were apparently extensive traders and owners of slaves. And this was because they could store food. This is where it all began, beginning wealth. Anyhow, the book is The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. This is just a small dip into it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. This is day 2 of Alex Lawson getting to sit in this seat and talk to you. You're stuck with me for a few more days here. I am having a great time at it. Tom is filming or working on a documentary on climate change, and so I'm excited to learn more about that. Yesterday, as you know, was a very heavy news day, and one of the things that I wanted to be able to watch live, but I couldn't. I had to actually, luckily, a lot of other people were watching it, and the highlights were amazing. But was the hearing with Sally Yates, and it was such an amazing hearing, and there's so many things to really delve into on it. And so I'm happy to be joined in studio by Zach Petkanis, who's the president of Petkanis Strategies and a veteran Democratic strategist. And we're going to get into it. And again, I didn't get to watch the whole thing, so I really do want you to kind of just take us where you think we should go. But the thing that just struck me in the beginning yesterday that we talked about was the tweets that Donald Trump, before the hearing, which definitely, I mean, I don't understand how you could look at them as anything other than witness intimidation.
No, I think that's exactly right. First, Alex, let me just say I'm very excited to be with you today. Congratulations on day 2. No, I think that you're exactly right. And I think that anybody who is looking at this, and if they're looking for proof or any sort of indication that this White House is, 1, very nervous, and 2, engaged in what I think is a pretty massive cover-up involving the Russia scandal, I think you need to look no further than those tweets. I mean, how unprecedented it is for the president of the United States to, 1, call an active investigation by the FBI a hoax. You know, I mean, he oversees the Department of Justice.
Right.
The FBI is part of his investigative branch, part of his executive branch, and he is saying that this is a hoax, that this is not a real investigation. That is weird, unprecedented, and I think goes to what you were saying potentially about intimidation, and then it's
It's at
specifically
least intimidating.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
The thing is, we don't know. We don't have words for this because we've never been in this situation before. Right? I mean, just to keep, but it's really hard to wrap my head around because this is a guy, he fired Sally Yates, right? So
Correct.
he fired Sally Yates. There's questions as to why he fired her. Was it so that she wouldn't talk about what she was just going to talk about? And then he tweets right? I mean, like, this is all very, it's un-American.
Mm-hmm.
It does not look at all like how our country normally operates, where there is a separation of power, where there are checks and balances, where the executive branch respects the autonomy of the investigations and the judicial branch and the legislative branch and is not trying to just mix everything up. There has to be something that they're very nervous about.
Absolutely.
But my thing is, this is like, he gets pulled. I don't think it's a speeding ticket, but just my analogy is, it's like getting pulled over for a speeding ticket and being like, no, I couldn't have been speeding because I was robbing this bank. Right? I mean, like, every time he tries to take their eye off of this, whatever it is, it just makes it worse.
No, it absolutely makes it much worse. And I mean, and you talked about when Sally Yates and how she was fired. I mean, one of the things that we learned yesterday, this White House tried to make it seem like she was fired because she defied the president on the Muslim ban, right?
Right.
And that was their excuse. But what we learned yesterday during this hearing is that Sally Yates was going to provide information showing Michael Flynn's, the activity that had her and the Justice Department so worried about it. I mean, to me, that was actually the biggest revelation out of all of this, is that until this point, we had thought, or the White House led us to believe, that the concern about Michael Flynn was that he was not being straight with the other members of the White House, that he wasn't being straight with Mike Pence about his communications with the Russians. But now we learn that the Department of Justice was actually concerned about the content of what he was saying to the Russians. And if you think about that, I mean, we already
so instead of just that he was talking to, it is what is he saying to them?
That's exactly right. And that, to me, was the most explosive piece out of all of this. We already knew that he was in communication with Russian Ambassador Kislyak in late December, and he was dangling, or at least trying to make the case that the United States would not impose new sanctions on Russia in retaliation for the election interference that they did. We already knew that. So what else is Michael Flynn talking to the Russians about? Is it about potential collusion between the Trump administration and the Trump campaign and the Russians? We don't know. But something that he was saying scared the bejesus out of this White House, which is one of the reasons why they tried to stop Sally Yates from testifying to begin with.
So I would say there's so much here. We're gonna only be able to scratch the surface.
Absolutely.
First of all, the Republican senators, I'm just gonna go ad hominem for a second, because there was not a single one of them who did not look the fool. Yeah, I did not see any. The only one who maybe didn't look the fool but looked kind of sad was Grassley, who was just towing the line.
On the leaks, yeah.
Yeah, just like he was just hitting the talking points, but that was robotic. Everyone else was like trying to throw some haymakers, and they ended up just hitting themselves right in the face over and over again. And it's like, I want to get into the meat and potatoes, but there's so much to make fun of them on. Like Ted Cruz looked the absolute fool, and the internet is blowing up about that.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I think that's meat and potatoes too. I mean, the fact that the Republicans on the committee, except for two, there are only two Republicans on the committee that talked about Russia on that committee. It was Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the committee.
That's right.
And Ben Sass from Nebraska. Everyone else, including Ted Cruz, tried to talk about anything else to distract from the extraordinary revelations that we were finding out about the Russia scandal. And so I think that that's meat and potatoes because
they were trying to distract away.
Why are they running block and tackle for this administration when our democracy was attacked? It was attacked by a hostile foreign power that wishes to do this country harm. And instead of the Republicans on the committee saying, hey, we need to take this seriously. We need to protect our democracy. We need to hold people accountable. We need to hold the Russians accountable. They decided to talk about everything else except that and to try to protect this White House. And I think that that is incredibly significant.
So Graham was, and I don't have a transcript in front of me, but that so Clapper and Yates are sitting next to each other, and he was doing this thing that I think has been misread a lot because he was saying, to Yates, do you have evidence of collusion? I think, was it evidence? And she said, I can't answer that without exposing classified information. And then over to Clapper and said, you just said in your report that there wasn't any. And then back to Yates, like, your report of the FBI counterterrorism or counterespionage, counterintelligence report was not included in that, right? And got them to admit in the way that the report that Clapper had given did not include the FBI counterintelligence investigation, which is where I feel like this meat and potatoes is, right?
That's exactly. I'm so glad you're bringing this up because there's a lot of confusion out there, and and the White House is putting it out there to intentionally confuse people. I mean, Donald Trump tweeted that Clapper said that there was no evidence. That is actually the opposite of what he said. It's a lie.
He not only tweeted that, didn't he? I mean, I think he photoshopped it into
yes, he did.
the cover of his Twitter account.
I mean, that's how sensitive he is about this fact. I mean, so here are the facts on this.
Yeah.
That Clapper, when he looked at the information, he was looking at things like, what did the Russians do? How did they influence the election? What were the hacks that they did? They did it on WikiLeaks. They did it on John Podesta's emails. Mm-hmm. They did the DCCC. And that's only half of it. There was also a massive propaganda effort flooding social media with anti-Hillary, pro-Trump pieces of information. The things that we saw just recently in the French election. Yep. That's what his scope of his investigation in the intelligence community was about. He was not looking at what the FBI is currently looking at, which is about the potential potential treasonous collusion between the Trump administration, its campaign, and the Russian government and Russian spies. It is a very different thing, and that's one of the things they finally made clear yesterday. It is not that James Clapper says that there is no collusion. It's that the body of evidence that he looked at did not include whether or not there was evidence. That's what the FBI is doing.
And that there is this entire other investigation that is actually looking at that. It seems in our last minute in this segment, and I want to just keep this discussion going if you can stick with us. It seems that the intelligence assessment, the 11 agency, that was more on like kind of methodology type stuff, right? Though I don't know intelligence speak, excuse me, but it's like methods, right? So like the bot army and how are, the fancy bear hack and the phishing attacks, and how is this used to in a way to get disinformation out there in a which is an attack vector, disinformation. But the FBI one is looking at somewhat of a different thing, right? It's criminal behavior by individuals and groups of individuals. It's the human side of this, not this intelligence vector side.
Absolutely. They're looking for things that they can prosecute.
So, Zach, you can stick with us?
Absolutely.
So we're going to keep this discussion going and try to page through some of this. It's a really big story, and we're going to try to get as close to the bottom as we can of it. Here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we will be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Zach sticking with us to keep talking the Yates hearing on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we are talking the Sally Yates hearing, and there's just so much here. But one thing I just want to maybe spend a little bit of time on is just that exchange between Ted Cruz and Sally Yates.
I've watched that probably 10 times.
I mean, if you just listen to the social media, right? I mean, like, and let me say what I saw, and then. And, you know, I'm influenced because it was clipped and shared with, you know, so I knew this was going to be a humiliation. You watching it in real time didn't have that, you know, bias. But what I saw was the normal Cruz arrogance, which is this arrogance that is founded on very little, right? It's really does not have a foundation on which it stands, but he is the last to know that. And it's this, you know, you could even hear the implication, like, I went to Harvard Law, and what he said was, and this is, so the setup is, he doesn't want to talk about Russia, and thank you for pointing that out, because that is, I think that is important. Like, that is what they're doing, whatever they can do to make it not about what the hearing is on, and instead they were talking about the Muslim ban, and trying to make the case that that is what she was fired for, and that's where the there is. And he brings up the statute that, you know, he thinks gives the authority, and he just like throws it down, and he's like, ha ha. And Yates just immediately just belts him, but with this Southern sort of, I don't know where she went to law school, like University of Georgia, I believe, something like that. We can check that. And it just was this amazing retort. And she's like, well, you forgot this statute, which actually takes precedence over that. And Georgia School of Law. So the thing is, that is right where it was clipped. And I mean, the guy he looked a buffoon. He looked a fool. How did that fit into the rest of it? Or do you think there's more that we should, besides just making fun of Ted Cruz looking like an idiot, which he did, was there more to it in the last minute of this segment?
No, I mean, I think that was one of the key moments outside of during this hearing that was not directly about the Russia scandal. And look, she made him look like a complete idiot because he went into it with such condescension.
Yes.
And you just know that his staff had found this thing, and he thought, I got her, and you just know he didn't. There were a lot of senators that came back for the second round. He stormed out after that first round of hearing and didn't ask questions the second time because he didn't want to be humiliated.
Tail between his legs.
Humiliated once again.
That's an amazing. That was I almost worry that was such the takeaway segment of it that actually some of the other stuff might get lost. So I really do want to get back to, the things that we learned at the hearing. But there's always time to point out the buffoonery of Ted Cruz's arrogance. So thank you
and
for
great joy
indulging me on that. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we'll be right back continuing to talk about the Sally Yates hearing right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. Zach Petkanis is continuing to join us in studio. We have, just a few minutes here, and there's a lot in this hearing. What other revelations do you think came out of this?
Sure. Well, look, I think there are a couple really key things that came out of this, and not all hearings have new public information. This was not one of those hearings. I think one of the key things that we learned was that, unlike what the White House said, they said that Sally Yates had just given this kind of cursory, quote, heads up that there were some concerns about Michael Flynn. That actually ended up not being true. What Sally Yates testified, that's that she had multiple detailed conversations with the White House articulating that Michael Flynn was a problem, both in the fact that he was having these communications with the Russians, but also the content of what he was saying in those conversations, as we talked about before. He had 2 in-person meetings and 1 phone call with the White House counsel and Mr. Flynn. That was one of the things. The other pieces of information I think are really important is that when Sally Yates told the White House counsel that Michael Flynn was putting the White House in a position to be compromised because he was potentially lying to other members of the administration, the White House counsel didn't say, hey, that's a really big problem, we need to jump on that. Their response was, why do you care? You know, their response to the acting attorney general saying that your national security advisor could be compromised by the Russians
Right.
was, why do you care? I mean, that is not a normal response to this. And then another piece that I think is really important that was just hinted at was something that Clapper potentially indicated in his testimony. He was asked by Lindsey Graham if he had ever found a situation where a Trump business interest in Russia gave him concern. And Clapper replied, quote, in the course of the preparation of the intelligence community's assessment. He said, not in the course of the preparation of the intelligence community's assessment. And then Graham pressed him on that. And Clapper said, Senator Graham, I can't comment on that because that impacts the investigation. And so what that potentially means is that this investigation goes deeper than we originally thought, that it includes parts of Donald Trump's business, the Trump organization, the potential funneling of money, which has been rumored out there in the past. We don't know. But that was I think an important moment in this hearing that is getting completely glossed over right now.
So Zach, what is next on the calendar of this? I mean, like what comes after this? Because as you said, there was news, a lot of news surfaced during this hearing. I mean, are there more hearings scheduled? Is there what's coming up?
So look, the Senate Intelligence Committee, this was the Judiciary Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee are continuing to do their investigation. I have grave concerns about both intelligence committees and their ability to do their jobs. I have grave concerns about the Judiciary Committee from what we've seen right now. The fact that not every member of the Republicans on that committee, that they were not chomping at the bit to figure out what happened in terms of Russia was very telling to me. And they were willing to protect this White House. That shows me that the Congress cannot run an actual real investigation.
So Zach, I think, to me, it seems like a special prosecutor, an independent investigation needs to be done.
Independent commission.
An independent commission is the only path forward on this. Zach Petkanis, president of Petkanis Strategies, a veteran Democratic strategist. Thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We got more great show coming up on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mochaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year, 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the corporate crime reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives, or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin-producing or toxin-using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workman's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mochaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control frantically tried to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States. Used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mochaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the the deaths. This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. What a story. What a story. And I was just talking with Zach Petkanis about the Sally Yates hearing. I think I'm going to have to continue talking about this with my next guest, even though we weren't totally planning on this. But my good friend and colleague, John Bowser Bauman, the president of Social Security Works PAC, is joining us by Skype. John, how are you?
Hi, Alex. Yeah, we can handle this.
So,
no problem.
I mean, there was a really a lot there, and my discussion with Zach really pointed out there was new things that were unearthed during this hearing, like that it wasn't just that Flynn was in contact with the Russians, but what he was actually talking about is also at issue on this investigation. I mean, there's just a lot there. I'm going to just throw it to you this way. What do you think the fallout from that hearing is going to be in a sort of political sense?
Well, number one, Alex, you can hardly be surprised. This has been lurking in this direction for a very long time now, and honestly, we know very little about it. One piece of fallout that was pretty clear was that Lindsey Graham's already starting to ask questions. And in a political sense, that indicates that maybe this will even meander over to that side of the aisle. People that, care more about their country than they do about their political party would be certainly nice. In this context, and I think in a political sense, it's hard to imagine what the future is going to be. I mean, you and I are going to go about our business of trying to find 3 Republican senators who will pledge to keep their hands off of Medicare and Medicaid and pledge to vote against any reconciliation bill that cuts Medicare or Medicaid. But at the same time, on a parallel track, this Russia investigation, the series of Russia investigations are going to go on, and we will find out what they yield. We need to resist everything that needs to be resisted. But what this is going to yield down the line, I think is a fair statement. None of us know. One of the things that interests me the most was clearly a massive faux pas by Comey last week that's just getting uncovered about his statements about, what Huma Abedin actually did with her emails, which turned out to be entirely inaccurate. I think one of the most interesting questions in all of this, and I've been posing this way to my friends, and you're one of them, is I would like to know whether Jim Comey is actually just a GOP partisan hack, or he's Javert from Les Mis, a bureaucratic functionary who can't see the forest from the trees. I think those are the only 2 conceivable ways to explain. He did a horrible job of trying to defend his actions during the campaign. And, so throw out his explanation. It's either one or the other. He's either just at heart a partisan hack, or he's Javert from Les Mis, who, just chased Jean Valjean, for the uninitiated, over those candlesticks that Jean Valjean stole when he was a teenager, despite that Jean Valjean became a model citizen for the entire world and was the mayor of his town and was an awesome person. But, justice needed to be done, and you had to do it by the book. This makes me think, this last set of episodes makes me feel like Comey isn't doing it by the book at all. He didn't do it by the book last summer. That wasn't the book. So maybe he's just a partisan hack, and that could really put some monkey wrenches into these investigations that are going on, because in the end result, the FBI is going to be who finds out the most about everything.
John, it's such a complicated terrain, and I'm happy you brought up what we're talking about is actually the work that we do to try to block Trump Care and the fact that it is going to raid Medicare. It's going to destroy Medicaid, cuts $880 billion out of Medicaid, the largest provider of long-term care in the country. And our strategy, 70% of long-term care paid for by Medicaid. And our strategy has been consistent since December, actually. We've been going around the country and we've been targeting Republican senators who we feel might, for either pure political hackery or because they believe in it, vote no on a reconciliation bill that includes Medicare and Medicaid, which is what Trump Care is. And we're going to continue doing that. You know, we've been to Maine, we went to Nevada, we've been down to Arizona, we're going to get up to Alaska, we're going to go to Ohio, we're going to go to Pennsylvania, we're going to go all over.
West Virginia. And, on the Ohio-Pennsylvania trip, yes. And
Troy's going to help us on that one. And we're going to go all over, and this is our focus. And it's just at the same time, there's so much other things happening that it is going to be very, I think, it's important that we keep our focus on what we're doing. It's like, it seems to be one of the things of the age of Trump is that there's so much going on. You know, there's so many things happening all the time that it is difficult to actually maintain, you know, the focused resistance and opposition that we need to defeat these incredibly devastating bills that are coming out. And this is not even a question. It's more of a statement of like, that is why I think it's so important that we have this stated strategy and stick to it. But if you have any thoughts on, you know, it just seems different now than previously because there's just so much going on.
I think it's critically important that the most important point of all is that we each must understand our role and the way in which we can most be effective. And in that sense, what you and I were just talking about is the most important thing. We have to stay committed and focused on our strategy. Now, our strategy, your and my strategy in trying to find 3 Republican senators who will vote against any reconciliation bill that cuts Medicare or Medicaid, is meanders into another world of strategy that is critically important, which is empowering people in their own congressional districts and in their own states with regard to senatorial races, empowering people to put pressure on their elected officials. That's why you and I are taking the time to travel all across the country, you know, to find activists in the states we're talking about, Maine, West Virginia, Nevada, Alaska, to continue to put the pressure on their own senators. Obviously, town halls have been tremendously effective in activating activists to put pressure on specifically their House members with regard to to Trump Care. So this is all enormously important. The people that I feel, you know, the most compassion for in this situation are people in blue states with senators and congressmen that they don't need to pressure. And what is it for them? What is it that they can do? And I get this question all the time. You know, what can we do here in California? What can we do here in New York in a gerrymandered blue congressional district? You know, good question. But for everyone else, the role, sticking to your role and accomplishing your role and marching and calling and going to the town halls and going to the offices is absolutely imperative at this point. And for everyone to do the role in which they are going to be most effective so that the resistance is maintained. And during this bizarre time period in which it feels like we have conceivably an administration that was not elected in a fair way. And we're going to find out what, at the end of this story, we're really going to find out how unfair that election may or may not have been. But while this is going on, we also have to make sure that we resist massive legislative change that is going to ruin people's lives in America, including, things like Trump Care and the Muslim ban. And so far, so good. So far, so good, everybody. Everybody's doing their part. Stay focused, stay passionate, keep doing it. And let's you and I, also work on more things that people really in, blue states who are asking, what can I do? Let's work on that next, you and I.
And I have some ideas on that. But first, I like right at the beginning. So we had our first Hands Off Medicare and Medicaid event on the Hill. I'm forgetting the date now. December 7th, maybe? Was that right?
Yeah, right around the beginning of December.
Yeah,
yes.
And so we had Bernie Sanders and Senator Schumer and Leader Pelosi and a host of other elected officials and, this big event. And at the time I was saying, remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
But I learned something, and so it was just on social media, and I love it. And so it goes to what you were saying, which is that, in fact, it's not a marathon. It's a relay. It's a relay.
Right. It's a series of sprints. It's more like a relay, right?
And we all do our part. And then we do have to remember that we can't do everything, right? We run our leg, and then we pass the baton, and then another person runs their leg. And when the baton comes back, we run ours. And, I say this on this show a lot. The most radical act you can take is self-care, taking care of yourself so that you are in a good place for this work. And that's so, I say it because I've seen so many activists who are dealing with very difficult things not follow this advice, not take care of themselves. And we really can't affect change if we're not actually taking care of ourselves. So taking care of yourself, most radical act you can take. Right after that, it's getting organized. And I think that's to lead into what I think blue state folks can do, as the strategy is at that moment, they don't have the baton, but they can continue to get organized. They can support the organizations that are leading that leg of the relay. And they can also, very importantly, always remember what we're fighting for. They can fight for what we want to come out of the other side. So we're going to resist and oppose the terribleness of the McConnell, Ryan, Trump agenda. But once we defeat this, we need to be halfway through the race of what we're fighting for. Healthcare for everyone in this country as a right, an expanded Social Security, an increased minimum wage, and environmental policies that respect science and the earth, right? These are the things that we know, and that's what we can always have our friends and allies in blue states doing, as the baton at this moment might be with somebody else. It's very similar to like when you and I, John, go into a state and we're talking to people. It's not us who, right? We are pretty much useless when it comes to calling Susan Collins, right?
Correct. This is the essence of the point, right?
The only thing we can do,
it's not for us to do.
Right.
Right. The
only thing we can do is say to folks who come out to see us in these states, the baton is with you at this point. And you know, let's we have a couple minutes left in the segment. I'm kind of hopeful on our strategy. I never underestimate Mitch McConnell. I never underestimate Mitch McConnell. But the fact is that the thing that came out of the House is such a flaming piece of garbage that
it's a monstrosity.
It is a giant flaming piece of garbage. And you know, I think part of the strategy is the accountability on the House members who voted for it, so that the Senate actually see the price that they would have to pay for passing this massive tax cut at the expense of people's health and lives. But tell me what you think, just, right now, what you're seeing. We're going to be going all around. We're going to be spending hours and hours and hours and days and weeks going around the country fomenting people to call in and organizing people to call in and go to town halls. What do you think right now? What do you think the outcome is going to be?
Well, I think in this regard, that we should note very importantly that the horrendous nature of the House bill, and amazingly they passed this thing, which is just psychotic. It's going to open up a huge amount of House races of districts that are, so if you're in a blue state, but you long since gave up, but you're in a district that's gerrymandered red, start working now, guys, because 2018, if things keep going the way they're going, there's going to be a huge amount of House races that are winnable suddenly that were never thought to be winnable before. We're going to be able to hang people with that vote. This is a vote for taking away 24 million plus peoples we don't even know yet. The CBO score is going to be next on this monstrosity. So it's a minimum of 24 million people most likely losing their health care. And, Jimmy Kimmel suddenly weighing in and stuff is, tragically, because he, for the rest of his life, is going to have to be dealing with, his own son's pre-existing medical condition.
John Bowser Bauman, thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. I hope you're going to come back when I'm hosting, with Tom's hosting, and update us on this effort and what we're seeing around the country.
It's always my pleasure.
To
Race
Thom
for
Hartmann.
peace.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to be taking your calls in the next hour right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, and I'm going to go to the phones. I only got a couple minutes here, but I'm going to go to Omar in Virginia. Omar, you're on the line. Omar, are you there? Maybe not. So I'm going to go to Corky in New York. Corky, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, you're on the line.
Yeah, I get frustrated because the media and the reporters, they all focus on Donald Trump and him being president. The fact of the matter is he is still steaming from that correspondence dinner. And he's doing everything he can to erase President Obama from the records and from his mind and get back to some respect that President Obama took away from him. President Obama made him out to be the joke he is, and he still cannot get over that. You've seen his personality, right?
Yep. I don't know if I traced it all back to that correspondence dinner joke, but that is because you remember he was, he launched his political career on this massively, overtly racist conspiracy theory, and the corporate media empowered him the entire time around, birtherism. And that, the correspondence dinner was in the context of that about Donald Trump. So, I do think your statements about him being a very, very small man, a very, very small and petty man are exactly on point. And it does seem like he's doing as much as he can to just erase the legacy of President Obama, that he's actually driven by that, as well as whatever he watches in the morning on Fox and Friends. So the idea that he doesn't have any that he's not interested in any sort of governance is really on its face obvious, right? This guy is not in any way interested in being a president, in being the president of the United States of America. He is really only interested in being Donald Trump and making things, the office that he holds, work for him being Donald Trump and what that means, his business interests and the business interests of his family, which are his business interests. And we just keep seeing that over and over and over again, Corky. So I think you're right. The man has no interest in governance. I mean, we just saw apparently Kushner's are over in China selling, just straightforwardly selling, basically visas for cash, investments in business interests related to the Kushners or into the Kushners' business interests. I mean, the story's developing, but it's just remarkable how brazen it is that they care nothing for governing the country and only for making money, for making this office make them money. It's unbelievable. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom while he works on a very important documentary on the effects of climate change. And, I think I just had, I opened the show with Zach Petkanis talking about the Sally Yates hearing yesterday. And then my good friend and colleague, John Bowser-Baumann, joined us to talk about the resistance, a bit about, the Sally Yates hearing, because there's just so many things going on. And it's not by design. I do think that in the beginning they were trying to, the Trump administration was trying to just keep a lot of things going, so it was difficult to resist. But now it's just like all these plates are spinning or all the balls are in the air. And it's just really important for the resistance, for those of us who not only don't want to see Donald Trump's policies pass, and we don't, and we're going to resist and oppose those, but those of us who are going to continue to build the country and the world that we want to live in and that we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren. It's going to be incredibly important for us to recognize that we can only do our part. And we can't do everything, and we shouldn't worry about that. We shouldn't try to do everything. What we need to do, as always, is get organized. If you care about one aspect of what's going on, find an organization that's working on that. If there's not an organization that's working on that, look into some of these distributed action or these distributed groups like Indivisible, Resistance Recess. But don't think you have to do it alone, and don't think that you have to do everything. It's not a sprint. It's not a marathon. It's a relay. And we have to remember that. We have to stay focused and do what we can to fight for the world that we believe in. And then we're going to win. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, this is President
against the law's religion or tranquility of Muslims. And as the said states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Muslim nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries, end of quote. But for the founders, this wasn't just an issue of being Christian or not. They didn't want any organized religion mixing its functions with government. For example, on February 21st, 1811, President James Madison vetoed a bill passed by Congress that authorized government payments to a church in Washington, D.C. to help the poor. Faith-based initiatives were a clear violation, in Madison's mind, of the First Amendment doctrine of separation of church and state, and could lead to a dangerous transfer of political power to religious leaders. Caring for the poor was a public and civic duty, a function of government, and should not be allowed to become a hole through which churches could reach and seize political power or the taxpayer's purse. Funding a church to provide for the poor would establish, in Madison's words, a legal agency, a legal precedent that would break down the walls of separation the founders had put between church and states to protect Americans from religious zealots gaining political power. Thus, Madison said in his veto message to Congress, he was striking down the proposed law because it helped a church to, quote, provide for the support of the poor and the education of poor children of the same, which, Madison warned, would be a precedent for giving to religious societies. That would be giving federal funds. Now, things have certainly changed since then with the faith-based initiative program that started under Reagan has now exploded. But anyhow, the book is What Would Jefferson Do?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom. And I want to go to the phones and just keep taking calls about Sally Yates, about the resistance, the relay, about the fight to defeat Trump care, to protect Medicare and Medicaid and people's health care. And yeah, I want to bring back one thing from yesterday about that, because I had Richard R.J. Eskow, the host of the Zero Hour, and my friend joined me in studio, and he had this piece that I think really put the Trump care thing right there for me, which is that for the 400 richest people who would get an average $7 million tax cut per year, 10 people would die per year to get that tax cut. So each person was worth $700,000 to these richest Americans who would get that tax cut. The immorality of Trump care was really crystallized with that. And I want people to think about that. So let's go right to the phones. Going to take Dean in South Carolina. Dean, you're on the line. Dean, are you there?
Hello?
Hi, Dean. You're on the air.
Good. Giving these rich people the tax breaks, that's been going on since I've been started voting in 1962.
Yeah.
And we've been thrown crumbs ever since.
I agree.
And the riches are getting richer. Just like I say, man, how long ago was that, 62? And we've been promised, the working people, they're going to really come up and be just like the riches. But no, the riches are making more millions to put in the bank.
Yep. And everyone else is left in the dust.
Why is nothing being done? 50 years, 60 years? It's still going on. And next year, 3 years from now, you're going to have people parading up and down in front of the White House. Nothing's going to be done. Assholes in there just grinning and laughing at us. And my
All right, Dean, we had to let you go. Can't swear on air. So sorry about that, Dean. Your point that the working folks are getting left behind is true, and that the super rich just continue to get richer is also true. And we have to fight back and we can't get discouraged. And we shouldn't be surprised that the super wealthy and the super rich are formidable opponents, and they are. And it should encourage us in some ways to be proud of, not in some ways, it should encourage us to be proud of the victories that we have achieved, and to not forget the victories that we have achieved, but to never be satisfied with where we are, because the gains are going to the few and the many are left by the wayside right now. Michael in California, you're on the air. Michael in California.
Hey, Alex. About the Kushner family and his wife, Ivanka. After JFK put RFK as Attorney General, nepotism rules were put into place to not allow that to happen again. So how can Ivanka and Jared Kushner, whose father, Charles Kushner, was convicted for felony illegal campaign contributions, tax evasion, witness tampering, sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, only served 14 months. But how can they be in the White House? And do you know if Kushner's father can vote now that he's a convicted felon? Thank you, Alex.
Michael, I don't know the answer to that last question, but I actually have a very strong opinion that the franchise should not be taken from anyone for being convicted of a felony and serving their time. I think the reenfranchisement of felons is a very important effort. So that was the last thing you said. I'm not sure if you stuck with me. Are you still with me, Michael?
Yeah, nepotism. So, how can the Republicans have?
I wanted to ask if you had Jared Kushner's father. I mean, it's a really salacious story, right? Because was it his brother or his business partner? He hired a prostitute. I believe this is actually what it was. Maybe I should get the information. The story of Kushner's father is really mind-bogglingly crazy. And then it was Chris Christie who actually was involved in putting him in prison, which is why, according to the scuttlebutt, Jared Kushner, made sure that Christie was tossed out of Trump land and didn't land anywhere in the administration, and was left out in the cold. Your question about the nepotism stuff is a really good one. I don't have the answer of why they are able to be in government. I really don't. And I think it was the German foreign minister who recently, I don't have the quote in front of me to get it perfectly right, but basically was saying, the foreign minister said that they didn't like it when family members of the executive started showing up in government roles, not just about Ivanka, but just that generally this was a very clear mark of an undemocratic, a very weak form of governance. And I think that's entirely true. That is why we made laws against nepotism. And those are right. That I'll kind of just state it, and I might get in trouble for it. I don't know if y'all are going to get me in trouble for it. Ivanka makes me angrier often than her father, because Ivanka defends everything that her dad does. She puts this like happy face on it. It's like, oh, it's the happy, lovable fascism. And I just think it is despicable that she tries to put a gloss of, her book that just came out was a literal slap in the face to millions of working women when she was writing this book as some sort of purveyor of wisdom, where she mainly misquoted and purloined quotes from great women throughout history. And, Donald Trump is the way that he is operating looks much more like a non-democratic people who would call themselves strong men but are really weak men. And we've seen this around the world, and it's very ancient that when there's so much corruption and double dealing and backstabbing and when it's not a democratic, fair process, and it's really just a race to loot as much as possible, that is usually where there is a lot of the family involved, right? Because they know they can trust their family members to make sure that the looted riches end up in their own coffers. So, Michael, I really do think that there's something deeply wrong with the fact that Jared Kushner, who I think is the only person less qualified for his role in government than Donald Trump, and that Ivanka Trump also has a role in government. It's un-American is what it looks like to me. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Taking more of your calls on the Thom Hartmann Program right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and going to go right to Jesse in Florida.
Hey, hi, Alex. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks.
Hey, I'm going to get off the topic a little about the Russian connection. Jimmy Carter said something yesterday, recent, that he voted for Bernie Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's historic, and y'all guys need to get him back on and ask him, how can a 1% white Southerner, first president since the Civil War, vote for socialist Bernie? If I could ask the question, I would ask him, what's the lessons learned for somebody like the CEO of CBS saying Trump makes money, he's bad, but he makes money. What would be the lesson learned for today with capitalism versus democracy? Because that seems to be the divide of the 1% versus the 99%. So I would love to see y'all get Mr. Carter back on, who said we aren't a democracy no more, and say what made him vote for Bernie.
Jesse, that's a great idea. I fully support that idea, and I don't think I can make that happen, but I think that Tom might be able to. Jimmy Carter is I'm going to take this in a little tangent direction, because Jimmy Carter, a lot of people say a lot of things about Jimmy Carter and his presidency, and there's all sorts of things out there. But what I want to focus on is after his presidency, he started his foundation. I don't know if many people know this, and it's kind of gross, so I'm warning you. There's a thing called guinea worm, which is a very, very nasty organism. It actually, the skin of it excretes acid. I think it's hydrochloric acid. And I won't go through the natural history of this thing, but it's so painful, it immobilizes its victims, both human and animal. It passed in livestock, and it's been around so long. It's actually, it is written up in the Bible, and it is a really destructive and nasty organism that, in fact, is preventable with some pretty simple technology, because it actually is passed through water. And so in watering holes, if you filter the water, but it doesn't even need to be a big filter, you can stop guinea worm. So Jimmy Carter saw this, and with his resources and his name, he embarked on a decades-long eradication effort of guinea worm, and he succeeded. And I don't think many people even know that. And it's right now in the final phases of that. I like to think of the type of person who sees that. He sees the misery caused by this preventable thing, and he dedicates himself and his resources to changing it, and he does, and he accomplishes it. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Let's go right to the phones. John in Minnesota, you are on the air.
Yeah, I wanted to point out another connection that Donald Trump has that I think is just mind-blowing. He has a direct connection with Fadi Zon, who actually went around and campaigned with him. He is an Indonesian politician that has connections with a group that is supporting ISIS in Indonesia because they want to get rid of the present or current president and, foment a coup. And then he has business connections with Harry Tanu, who also has connections with ISIS and with Fadi Zon. And some of the most despicable people that you could think of in Indonesian history that murdered 500,000, I think, to a million Indonesians. So this is the kind of president that we have right now. Isn't that nice?
John, this is one of those ones where there's so much out there that it seems there's so much, it's hard to actually pay attention to it all. I'm always learning new things, and I will tell you that I have never been shocked to learn that Donald Trump had done something wonderful. That has never been the case. It's never been the case that someone has called or told me, hey, you'll never believe it, but Donald Trump has yet another horrible person connection. That's always what it is. It's never in the direction of like, oh, you wouldn't believe it. He actually dedicated his life to the eradication of something horrible for the benefit of humankind. I don't think that shocking revelation is out there. I think that all of the revelations are about his connections to yet another billionaire, to yet another banker, to yet another source of personal enrichment, no matter the cost to the public, to the planet at large, as long as it enriches. He really is very emblematic of the global plutocrats, even if he's a striver. I think from their point of view, Donald Trump is actually like a wannabe to the Davos set and the global plutocrats. But he is really, to me, emblematic of the mindset, the sickness of greed that sees people only as bags of money to extract wealth from for personal benefit. And I would be hard-pressed to believe that he has even the ability to define public service. I don't think he actually can comprehend what that concept is. So, John, thank you so much for your call. I'm going to go to Sandy from California. Sandy, you're on the line.
Hi, Alex. I'm so glad I'm the next caller because I just heard you describe Hillary Clinton and her achievements. She did everything for her own personal gain, and that wasn't the reason for my call, though. That was Hillary, and it still is Hillary. And now Barack Obama is taking the $400,000 gigs, that he swore he wouldn't do. So, politics goes both ways. And Donald Trump is a billionaire. That's true. He's not really a Republican. He's more of a moderate. And
Right, Donald Trump is a moderate.
Control this country are Democrats. If you look at Zuckerberg, Apple, Bezos.
But wait, Sandy, how is he a moderate?
Because
which was the policy that you're saying is moderate? Is it the Muslim ban?
I'm all for that, for protecting our country. I'm for protecting our borders.
So you support an unconstitutional and extreme fringe
extreme to you
policy.
Look at what happened in Germany and France and some of these other countries. They're being taken over.
And Sandy, they're not being taken over. And here's the truth, Sandy. We are the United States of America. We are the U.S. of A. We defeated the Nazis. Then we turned around and defeated the Soviets. We are not perfect, but man, are we better than Donald Trump. Man, are we better than a very small, tiny little person who is so scared, so terrified for their own nonsensical reasons that they're willing to sacrifice children, refugees, whoever it is, so that they can feel secure for one more minute. You should read about Moloch. You should read about the cultists who would throw a child into the fire, believing that it bought them one more ounce of security. It didn't, and it doesn't. And the Muslim ban is not American, and it makes America weaker. It makes America less safe. And those are the facts. That is why people who have this very small vision are going to lose. Because the vast majority of America know that together, we're so much stronger than when we're divided up and scared of each other at every moment. So Sandy, thank you so much for your call. And I hope, you find a little bit of security in yourself and maybe re-examine some of the facts that you're so scared that you support these nonsensical and un-American policies. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and we will be right back after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talking about getting money out of politics right after this.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from my newest book, Adult ADHD. The first edition, or the first draft or version of which I actually wrote some 20 years ago, but it's we've updated it and reissued it, and I think you'll find it really interesting. This is from the introduction. There's a substantial subpopulation of the world that has a common and somewhat consistent set of personality characteristics. These traits have, for many people, led to difficulties in school, relationships, and work, and are collectively known among psychologists and psychiatrists as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. When researching this subject, I was struck by the number of ADHD adults I met and interviewed who'd chosen to become entrepreneurs, to strike out on their own, to forge their own unique lifestyles and businesses independent of others. Most often, these people are involved in an ever-changing life, often starting many businesses or regularly leading their existing companies in new directions. They thrive on stimulation and living on the edge. One biography of Ben Franklin asserts that he was America and possibly the world's first real entrepreneur, because rather than simply learning a trade and opening a lifelong business, He learned dozens of trades and created more than 30 businesses, as well as social and governmental institutions, the post office, libraries, all kinds of things Ben Franklin created for this country. This creation of something new over and over again is the core of entrepreneurship, whether you're a company owner or an entrepreneur within a company where your job constantly involves new projects or change. When writing an earlier book, Attention Deficit Disorder, A Different Perception, I heard from a psychologist who specializes in ADHD that perhaps as many as half of all entrepreneurs have ADHD. Now, a few years later, and after conversations with thousands of entrepreneurs around the country, I've come to the conclusion that nearly all entrepreneurs have ADHD to one extent or another. And I would add probably the vast majority of salespeople as well. I'm not speaking here of the fellow who carefully invests his money in a corner dry cleaning shop, runs his own business on that corner for 25 years to finally retire comfortably. While that person may meet some definitions of entrepreneurship, I'd rather refer to him as an independent small business person. Such people constitute an important and stable core of the business life of their community and of this country. Instead, I'm speaking here of those individuals who create or participate in dynamic, thriving, ever-growing, ever-changing companies. I'm speaking of the ones who take chances, who experiment. Henry Ford, who had several bankruptcies before he hit on a formula that worked. Or Thomas Edison, who tried thousands of different variations before he could get a working light bulb. These people's lives are often littered with failures, but their successes have given a spark of vitality and enterprise to America and made our country, particularly in its early days, unique in the world. They continue to bring us innovation and change that give great hope and promise for the future of our nation and the world. Some have applied their entrepreneurial characteristics to become great leaders. John F. Kennedy and Winston Churchill, for example, stand out. Others have created inventions, businesses, social institutions, and art that have changed the world. This book is about people who have overcome their challenges and in many cases actually used aspects of their ADHD to achieve prosperity or victory, and for those who would seek to emulate them. This book is for those who are willing to take chances, to forge a new niche in this business, social, cultural, political, or art worlds, or to create something new, and how to do that successfully. In the writing of this book, I've interviewed many people in the business world, including some of America's greatest. Few would want to jump up and raise their hands and say, yes, I have something that psychiatrists call a disorder. Nonetheless, all were, to my mind, hunters, my term for people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorders described in this book, to one extent or another. They shared stories of their successes and failures from childhood through advanced age that were remarkably similar. From these stories and my own successes and failures as a business person and entrepreneur, I've assembled a collection of specific tools and techniques for people with ADHD to achieve success in the business world. And then, we get into chapter 1, the nature of ADHD. We all experience a spectrum of levels of states of consciousness as we go through moment to moment on daily life. On one end of the spectrum is the very open, distractible state that we experience when driving or walking on a busy street, noticing all the events around us, alert to everything in our environment. At the other end of the spectrum are the tightly focused states of consciousness in which we're so intent on the book we're reading or the conversation we're having that the ticking of the clock in the room or the drone of traffic outside ceases to exist. When in a normal and relaxed state of consciousness, most people fall into a place somewhere between these two extremes of open and focused. They shift from open to focused and back with relative ease. It's difficult for the average person, however, to maintain either an extremely focused or an extremely open state of consciousness for hours at a time without such things as meditation training or the use of drugs like caffeine. The natural tendency is to snap back to the center line between the two states, which is to have a little bit of both. Some people, however, have an off-center baseline state of consciousness as their norm. Estimates vary between experts and researchers, but these people may represent as few as 10 or as much as 40% of the population. And this is the beginning of that difference that makes for ADHD and how it can be a tool, a useful thing, something that can actually help people succeed in the world. So this is our book report, our book reading today from my book, Adult ADHD, How to Succeed as a Hunter in a Farmer's World.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and I'm joined in studio by Bruce Berlin, the author of Big Money's Grip on America, and the state director of New Mexicans for Money Out of Politics. I'm going to resist only talking about how beautiful and awesome New Mexico is so we can focus on money and politics. But I want to say this little, I don't know, you probably can't read it right here. This little thing right here says, brilliant, read this book, Thom Hartmann. So when Tom says that something is brilliant, that means that it really is brilliant. So, Bruce, thanks for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
You know, Money Out of Politics is, it's like a hub issue, right? There's a lot of issues.
Definitely.
There's a constellation of issues, but it really does basically tie a lot of them together. I don't think it's above or below any of the issues. I've heard a lot of people say it should be everyone's second or third issue, meaning you don't have to convince everyone that money in politics is the primary one, right? So I fight to protect and expand Social Security and Medicare to lower drug prices. So it's not going to be the number one, but getting money out of politics is how you break the grip of the billionaires on Wall Street who are trying to destroy Social Security and Medicare, and the grip of the pharmaceutical industry, who is the clearest. They're the most corrupting industry out there, is the pharmaceutical drug industry. Getting money out of politics would literally help all the issues on the right side of them.
And I would say that it is the overriding issue, because it's not just the pharmaceutical; it's the oil, big oil, and healthcare and immigration. Every issue is affected by the way that money corrupts the political system.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, like one that I just saw recently, just to like lay out one of them. So ICE, is big in the news because Donald Trump, he's this xenophobic nativist sort of thing. So he's really like, we're going to build a wall and he empowers ICE. And he wants to zero out PBS. I want to zero out ICE and give their budget to PBS. That's my proposal. That's my personal proposal. But the number 2 guy at ICE, that's serious. I think we should zero out ICE, take that budget line and move it over to PBS. But the number 2 guy at ICE just moved over to the private prisons, right? That is the exact route that this corruption plays, right? People in government actually know, some of them, who aren't, they're not public servants. What they're doing is they're creating a path to the lucrative private industry job that's coming down afterwards. So there's all of these avenues in for big money to just distort the entire process. And in many,
you mentioned the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, and we now have this since 2003 in the Medicare Drug Bill Reform Act. Billy Tolson at the time was the chair of the committee that drafted that bill, and which prevented the government from negotiating for lower drug prices like Canada and most other countries do. And the next year, he went over to the private industry and got a job for $2 million a year as the head of pharma, the pharmaceutical industry's lobbying key branch.
Sometimes they actually, when they have the buyout, so there's the sellout, the buy-in, because it goes both ways.
Oh, definitely.
Sometimes they actually will pay like it's an exit bonus, but it's actually to make whole while their person goes on the inside to corrupt the process for them, when they come back out to their 7-figure job. I mean, it's so gross in this town, and it's notorious. So what are some of the activities that you think we can take? And all of that is like the Iron Triangle stuff, not to mention the money that's just pouring in because of Citizens United to just corrupt the entire electoral process. So what are some of the ideas you have for fighting back?
Well, first I want to make clear that the name of the book is Breaking Big Money's Grip on America. It's not big money, it's Breaking Big Money's Grip on America.
What did I say?
You skipped the breaking, which is the most important part.
I got to do it again. Yeah, you got to... Thank you. The most important part. Breaking big money's grip on America. I like that because it's the action that we're going to take to break it.
And if you look at American history, I find, and I think you'll find, that what really makes a difference in making these big changes is movements. The women's movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the LGBTQ movement. When millions and millions of people get together and push for a certain thing, it happens. It may take a long time. The women's suffrage was 70 years before the women got the vote. But that's what I think we need, a democracy movement.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's going to take this long, but
hopefully not.
But there's even longer. The abolitionist movement actually started before our country was even a country. During the Revolutionary War, there was abolitionist hope that the country could be founded as an anti-slavery country. There was a big movement. They thought, and then no, and it didn't occur until almost
1865.
Yeah, almost a century later. So, these things, but through it all, what I think is important is the movement is what sustains the advocacy, the action, right? You need a movement because otherwise people can just kind of fall by the wayside or they can get tired. I always say the most radical act you can take is to get organized because it's only in being organized that you can really amplify your voice and your power, and you can rely on your neighbors and friends.
One of the biggest problems right now is that so many people are in despair because of the Trump administration. And the fact is that any action is better than no action. And even if it's the wrong action, it may lead you to the right action next time. But as you sit home in despair, you're never going to get anything done, and it only makes things worse. So you go deeper into your despair. So getting out there and doing something, joining an organization, protesting, petitioning, whatever it is.
Phone calls to your representatives and your senators, whatever it is. The most radical act, I do two superlatives, which isn't fair linguistically, but I still do it. The most radical act that you can take is self-care, because that despair is actually corrosive as well.
Definitely.
And so that's part of that self-care, though, is actually getting organized and not feeling alone and not thinking that you have to do everything alone. So the movement to break big money's grip on America, you're in New Mexico.
Yeah, we formed an organization called New Mexicans for Money Out of Politics, and it's less than a year old last summer, and it comes out of some of the ideas from my book. And one of the main things we were focused on is the 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United and to declare that money is not speech and corporations are not people.
Which is like so obvious
to me and you.
That money ain't speech, corporations ain't people.
Yeah.
How can people find out more about your organization, how they can get involved? They can obviously find your book, Breaking Big Money's Grip on America.
It's on Amazon, and my website is www.breakingbigmoneysgrip.com.
Breakingbigmoneysgrip.com. And, the 28th Amendment is basically what we would see from something like that is that our electoral system would look wildly different. We'd have a publicly funded system, and it would not be these billion-dollar campaigns. And, I think that would markedly change so many things about our polity, including who can get involved in politics.
Definitely. I mean, the fact is you've got to be a billionaire or you have to be able to raise hundreds of millions of dollars in order to participate on that level.
So, I mean, you have to be a billionaire or you have to have a Rolodex filled with them right now. And that's not, the way that a functioning democracy should work.
And we're working with the American Promise, which is a national organization based in Massachusetts, and to work on this 28th Amendment.
Are you taking state actions? Are you finding pickup in New Mexico at the state level?
Yeah, our legislature only meets for a short time each year, but we did do some lobbying in January and February when they were meeting. Yeah.
So what is
another thing that is a key to this? I think is We just saw in this last election where Hillary Clinton won by 3 million people in the popular vote, but she lost the Electoral College. So we'd like to get rid of the Electoral College or get around it with this national popular vote compact. And if enough states come together with that have 270 electoral votes together, then the compact would go into effect, and all those states would guarantee that the popular vote winner in their state would get the electoral votes, regardless of who won the Electoral College.
I mean, there's I love talking about this one. Getting rid of the Electoral College would be very difficult, but reforming the Electoral College is actually quite feasible.
Yeah, it's getting around it, really.
Yeah, you could do representational or proportional Electoral College as well. You could have the states not be winner take all, but actually, you know, whatever the percentage is, 80% even, but it's always less than that. You know, 60% go to whatever candidate, and then 40 go to the other one.
Well, 2 states already have
exactly.
Yeah.
And so we have a model, and that's a state-by-state thing. So you could march that across the country and fundamentally change in a more majoritarian direction. So we only have about 30 seconds left here, Bruce. I opened up a big one there, but come back and we'll talk again.
Definitely.
Tell people where they can find your book and get in contact.
You can find it on Amazon, and you can find it on my website, breakingbigmoneysgrip.com.
Bruce Berlin, Breaking Big Money's Grip on America. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to be right back after this.
See here. Alan in Beaumont, Texas. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
I want to make a couple of quick observations. First of all, just to make a point, you know, it's like if anybody doubts that there's unequal justice in this country, you know, speaking to you as a black man, let's say as a black man growing up, you know, I'm as aware of crime as anybody else. And as a black man, you always knew that, let's say, for instance, if you go out and commit a murder, if you committed a murder and the person was white, you knew that you were pretty much guaranteed to either get a long sentence or a life sentence, as opposed to, say, killing another black man.
Right, or a death sentence, yeah.
So if anybody doubts that there's unequal justice, even when it comes to police, and I'm not saying that these people shouldn't have been charged, but the 2 black cops in New Orleans that, you know, inadvertently killed, you know, the suspect was white. He had his son in the car with him, and they were shooting at him, but they ended up killing his son. Within 72 hours, those police were arrested.
When was this?
I think it happened sometime last year, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely happened.
Yeah, no, I remember the event. I don't remember the details, and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't some new thing that, you know.
So as far as justice is concerned, it's always been the color of the victim and the color of the perpetrator, you know, as far as who's more likely to get justice in those situations.
Right.
Now, the other point I wanted to make was this. You know, you know, based upon the events of last week and the last few years, everybody's wondering, well, you know, what's the answer? To me, our biggest problem in America, and Lord knows we have many, but our biggest problem is an allegiance problem. You know, and I'm not even going to say race because I know there's no such thing as racist, but people have allegiance to their color first, or they have allegiance to their religion first, or they have allegiance to their socioeconomic status first. If everyone would be more committed, if their first obligation in their life was to doing right, then that would go a long ways towards eliminating a lot of the problems that we have.
You make a really brilliant point, Alan, and that is that it is human nature
to kind of circle the wagons on behalf of your own. And this comes out of our need to protect family. I mean, I'm sure it's wired into our DNA. And then family expands to community, expands to clan, expands historically in other societies to tribe, but in our society to community, to state, to nation. And so if we could replace or not replace, but if we could supersede, if we could make the larger commitment a commitment to the overall society, what's good for all of us as Americans, and start talking and have a serious conversation about, how do we make sure that everybody, regardless of color or race, regardless of race or socioeconomic status or regionality or whatever, has access to health care, has policing that is not unreasonable, has some relative certainty, safety in terms of housing and employment and reasonable employment, then yeah, we take a first step. Alan, thanks for the call. Good to hear from you.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. One more time, breaking big money's grip on America. Bruce Berlin. I am going to now learn all of the things that are happening out there while I'm in the studio here, because we have joining us by phone Patrick Gavin of Talk Media News. Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So what is happening out there?
Well, we're starting to get a sense just from reporting and talking to the senators about just exactly what's going to happen with the House bill in the Senate. I think the consensus was, and it's a pretty accurate one, was that the House bill would be dead on arrival in the Senate and that the Senate would craft its own bill. I think that some of the pessimism about the Senate actually doing something on health care we're starting to see that it may be a little bit too optimistic, I think, for Democrats. There's going to be a totally different approach in the Senate than in the House, as you would expect. I think that Trump and Republican leaders are just essentially going to allow Mitch McConnell to kind of do his thing and really craft a legislation that he thinks, given his experience in the Senate, actually not only stands a chance in the Senate, but that the House will also ultimately support as well. So what is that going to look like? I think that some of the things that you might expect the Senate to do would be for some more generous tax credits for insurance markets. I think ditch some of the advanced refundable tax credits. I think also, probably to the surprise of no one, will probably soften a lot of the House bill's Medicaid cuts, primarily to provide some political cover from senators in some of these top Medicaid expansion states, such as Rob Portman or Lisa Murkowski. I think it will be, at least in Republican terms, a sort of softer, friendlier version of what the House bill. But this is not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, we're looking at the earliest probably before the August recess. One senator, I believe, talking on CNN yesterday, thought maybe by the 2018 midterms. And when you look at September's schedule, they've got the spending bill, they've got a debt limit, they've got a number of expiring programs. So healthcare reform is not going to be signed into law, if it does at all, for a really long time. So this battle is really just beginning.
I think that is the part that shocked me the most was that it took them 3 tries to get it out of the House, which is the easiest part of the process, but also that they had a beer bash, spiked the football, celebrated as if they'd accomplished something, and it is really, that's just the very beginning. This is going to be a very long and arduous process, and I think, I worked on Obamacare from the outside. I worked for Healthcare for America Now, pushing for the public option. It was a long process. And, Mitch McConnell is very savvy. I never underestimate him. But after the Senate, it has to go to conference, and then the bill has to go back to both houses. It's going to be hard. It's going to be an arduous process. So I agree with you completely that this is just the beginning and in no way the end of this process. What else is happening out there?
Well, the other thing I would quickly add to that, too, is I think that, and I imagine you might agree, I think the longer this goes out, the more complicated its success becomes for 2 reasons. One, Trump is not a patient guy. He wants to get things done. Even in that sort of spike, the touchdown Rose Garden ceremony, he boasted about how quickly he got this done. And two, the obvious stick in the mud for this plan happening is are these town halls. I mean, are groups like Indivisible that are energized and active and enthusiastic and just continue to cause real, frustration and annoyance, I think, for Republicans. And so these things add up. I mean, this is why Republicans in the House wanted to get this done so soon, and so they didn't have to deal with these town halls that we've seen over the past week. And the same thing is going to be true for the Senate. I mean, they're going to want to get this done quickly, but the longer this resistance movement is able to, I think, put on a good political effort in fighting this, the already 20% approval rating for this bill will probably just get smaller, I think.
Yeah, and I will, just again, I'm agreeing with your assessment here and bringing my own experience in. You run into the midterms much sooner than you think, because the midterms don't start at the election. They start when the campaigns start running, which is almost now. And, the longer this thing goes, it goes right into the midterms. Then people are thinking pure politics. And then those town halls and the resistance and people start thinking about their political futures. And so, yes, I think that is, this is going to be a long and arduous process. It also has a high likelihood of starving, of sucking all the oxygen out of the room legislatively, which is, again, very similar to what happened with Obamacare. The difference is that on the one hand, it was an effort to save people's lives by giving people who couldn't have health care before health care. And then in this time, it's actually to leave people to die by ripping their health care away. So that fundamental difference. But the process, I think, is going to look markedly similar. Patrick, what else is going on out there?
Well, we're getting a bit of the reaction to Sally Yates' performance yesterday on Capitol Hill, and I think that by most measures she did quite well. I think Democrats at the very least are very happy with it. And I think one of the more interesting takeaways that I think is slowly, or even less than slowly, really shifting how people are thinking about this whole issue between Michael Flynn and Russia and then the Trump campaign or Trump administration is this idea that I think she did a really good job presenting yesterday, which is that a lot of people had very serious concerns about Michael Flynn, and yet the one person who didn't was, of course, the president. So we heard yesterday about how Chris Christie of New Jersey did not want Mr. Flynn, or did not think he was qualified to be the national security advisor. Obviously, Sally Yates agreed. Obviously, President Obama agreed. So to me, that's what's more interesting things is sort of why is it, I think at some point Trump will have to explain this. He's sort of, a lone man in the corner on this one as one of the sole defenders of Michael Flynn when really across the board, even members of his own transition team raised some major reservations about Mr. Flynn.
Patrick Gavin of Talk Media News. It's a great point. Where did his confidence in Flynn come from? I don't think we've seen the end of this story by any means. Patrick Gavin, Talk Media News. Thanks for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today we're reading from my book, Rebooting the American Dream. This is Chapter 1, Bring My Job Home. And we're about halfway into the chapter here. It starts out with this section called The High Cost of Free Trade. During the 1930s, none of the Asian powerhouse economies had adopted American industrialization strategies. So when Franklin Roosevelt put money into workers' pockets and they bought toys or clothes or radios, all those items were made in Alabama or Connecticut or Michigan. Now they're made in China, which experienced a labor shortage in 2009, causing its average wage to increase from 80 cents an hour to $1.14 an hour, and its economy to grow by more than 8%. China has been following the lead of Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea during the past half-century and has become an industrial powerhouse as a result. And ironically, each of these countries got its strategy from us. George Washington's Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, proposed it in 1791. And by 1793, most of the parts of his report on the subject of manufactures had been instituted as a series of legislative and policy steps. And it didn't start with Hamilton. He was just building on King Henry VII's Tudor Plan of 1485, which turned England from a backwater state with raw wool as its chief export into a major developed state that was producing fine clothing and other textile products from wool. He accomplished this by severely restricting the export of wool from England with high export tariffs and restricting the import of finished woolen goods with high import tariffs. King Henry learned this from the Dutch. They copied the Romans, and the Romans got it from the Greeks 3,000 years ago. Nonetheless, President Obama continues to follow his predecessors, Bush Jr., Clinton, Bush Sr., and Reagan, all in the religious belief that free trade will save us all. It's all nonsense. Free trade is a guaranteed ticket to the poorhouse for any nation, and the evidence is overwhelming. Even the phrase free trade was introduced by King Henry VII back in the 1400s as something that England should encourage other countries to do while it maintained protectionism. A more contemporary example of the application of that wisdom can be seen in South Korea. In the 1960s, South Korea was an undeveloped nation whose major exports were human hair for wigs and fish, and whose average annual income was around $400 per working family. Today, it's a major industrial power with an average annual per capita income of more than $32,000, and it beats the United States in its rate of college attendance, exports, and lifespan. Korea did this by closing its economy and promoting its export industries. A decade earlier, Japan had done the same thing. 40 years earlier, Germany had done it. In July of 2009, with no evident irony or understanding of how South Korea went about becoming a modern economic powerhouse, President Obama lectured the countries of Africa during his visit to Ghana. As the New York Times reported, quote, Mr. Obama said that when his father came to the United States, his home country of Kenya had an economy about as large as that of South Korea per capita. Today, he noted, Kenya remains impoverished and politically unstable, while South Korea has become an economic powerhouse, end quote. In that day's newspaper, or the next day's newspaper, the lead editorial titled Tangled Trade Talks repeated the essence of the mantra of its confused op-ed writer, Thomas L. Friedman, that so-called free trade is the solution to a nation's economic ills. But South Korea did not ride the free trade train to success. South Korean economist Ha Joon Chang details South Korea's economic ascent in his 2007 book, Bad Samaritans, The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism. In 1961, South Korea was, as the president said, as poor as Kenya, with an $82 per capita annual income and many obstacles to economic growth. South Korea's main exports were primary commodities, such as tungsten, fish, and human hair for wigs. And that's how the Korean technology giant Samsung started, by exporting fish, fruits, and vegetables. Today, it's the world's largest conglomerate by revenue, $173 billion. By throwing out free trade and embracing protectionism during the 1960s, South Korea managed to do in 50 years what it took the United States 100 and Britain 150 years to do. After a military coup in 61, General Park Chung-hee implemented short-term plans for South Korea's economic development. He instituted the Heavy and Chemical Industrialization Program, and South Korea's first steel mill and modern shipyard went into production. South Korea also began producing its own cars and used import tariffs to discourage imports. Electronics, machinery, and chemical plants soon followed, all sponsored or subsidized and tariff protected by the government. Between 1972 and 1979, the per capita income grew more than 5 times. In addition, new protectionist slogans were adopted by South Korean citizens. For example, it was viewed as a civic duty to report anyone caught smoking foreign cigarettes. All the money made from exports went into developing industry. South Korea enacted import bans, high tariffs, and excise taxes on thousands of products. South Korea's transformation was, to quote Chang, as if Haiti had turned into Switzerland. This transformation was accomplished through protecting fledgling industries with high tariffs and subsidies, and only by gradually opening itself to global competition. In addition, the government ran or heavily funded many of the larger industries, at least until they were globally competitive. The government ran or regulated the banks and therefore the credit. It controlled foreign exchange and used its currency reserves to import machinery and industrial products. Now, I'm not suggesting that latter part for the United States, but the fact of the matter is that protecting your economy works. And we're basically the only developed country in the world that doesn't do it any longer. Rebooting the American Dream is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we're going to get to more of your calls in just a few minutes. But first, there's so much news happening that I want to really surface and highlight this story that I think should be really, it should be front page news all over the place. And I'm bringing on Scott Ross, the executive director of One Wisconsin Now. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Alex, thank you so much. Can't tell you how happy I am to talk to you.
So this is I talk a lot about the greedy liars on Wall Street and the global plutocrats and the corrupt corporate medias, their propagandists, and, you know, this network and movement that they have to just destroy their opposition to taking everything, to hoovering up all the resources. And I don't think this is overstating it. I think that CMD broke the story, right?
Well, I think there was I saw the first story I saw was the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel's Dan Weiss, and CMD, they sort of did it at about the same time.
So,
but yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there for sure now.
Exactly. It's such a big story that everyone who wrote it, and I give both of them the credit for breaking it, this is exposing kind of the how even these billionaires work. So I want you to talk everybody through it. What is this story that I'm teeing up here? What happened? How are you involved? And just take us through it.
Absolutely. So, Alex, I mean, obviously we've heard of, these organizations which spend money to advance a right-wing pro-corporate ideology, whether it's the Koch brothers or, say, ALEC. But there's a foundation right here in the city of Milwaukee where I'm calling you from. It's called the Bradley Foundation. It was established about 30 years ago. But over the last 15 years, they have literally become the most prominent but unknown funding of right-wing causes in the United States of America. They are a $900 million foundation that awards approximately between $30 and $40 million a year to specifically right-wing causes to advance a right-wing agenda. It's run out of Milwaukee, and the guy who, up until just recently, was in charge of it is a guy named Mike Grebe. And Mike Grebe is Scott Walker's campaign chair and was his campaign chair for his presidential campaign. Paul Ryan calls him his political godfather. And when Reince Priebus wanted to be the head of the RNC, Mike Grebe's the one who sent out the letter to all the RNC members saying, "This is my guy." And basically what happened was the Russians there was a Russian hack of the Bradley Foundation. They posted a bunch of documents online. And what we're finding with the documents is the inner workings of exactly how they work, but also the fact that they're trying to do what they've done in Wisconsin. We've been tracking them for at least for 5-6 years through our website, bradleywatch.org. But basically, they want to take what they've done here in the state of Wisconsin, which is a full takeover of state government on behalf of a radical right-wing agenda, and take that to states all across the country.
So everything we saw in Wisconsin, right, the decimating of the public sector unions, all of it.
Privatization of public schools.
Everything was part of a concocted, coordinated strategy by a shadowy group of billionaires who want to remake the country in their, fringe right-wing vision. And now we have the documents that show that is actually what's going on here.
Yeah, and again, one of the biggest issues that the Bradley Foundation has focused on in terms of financing is the privatization of our public schools. And we did an analysis a couple of years ago that showed over the course of time between 2005 and 2014, the Bradley Foundation doled out $108 million to 130 pro-school privatization outfits, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country. They have also been in charge of, things like voter suppression. They've been in charge of financing opposition research. They've been in charge of financing phony law firms that sue on behalf of Scott Walker's political agenda. And this is how micromanaging they are. Back in 2010, you might recall that when Scott Walker was on the ballot for the first time as the Republican nominee for governor, about 100 billboards sprung up all over Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with a woman behind bars saying voter fraud is a felony, $10,000 fine and 3.5 years in prison. Well, we uncovered in a joint investigation we did with Joy Reid when she was at the GRIO that it was actually the Bradley Foundation that had financed those billboards. Nobody knew who it was. We were able to expose it. And I guess, some of the work that we've done is why, as part of these documents that came out, we found that my little organization, One Wisconsin Now, is on the Bradley Foundation's enemies list that has groups from, about 17 groups from around the country. But there are 2 groups in Wisconsin on it, us and our friends over at the Center of Media and Democracy. So they're, and I'd say this, I'm very proud to have made the Bradley Foundation's enemies list, and we have every intention of remaining on it.
Yeah, I mean, you really, judge yourself by your enemies, and, those are a good one. They think you're an enemy. That means you're fighting on the right side of this battle. What is next in this fight? I mean, the information is critical to get out there because it is a inner workings type thing, and it shows just how coordinated this is because it is the politicians are not acting out of their they think this up and then they do it. They're acting in concert with a inside-outside strategy driven by these huge pools of ideologically conservative money that is doled out to everybody, shadowy front groups, just the Gorsuch nomination, right? So it was $17 million, $10 million spent to ensure that Obama's SCOTUS pick was stolen from him, and $7 million spent to ensure that Gorsuch is a Supreme Court justice. And that's the kind of efforts that we're seeing all over the place, and it's all linked to this network of conservative ideologues and their money. What is the fight back going forward in Wisconsin, and what do you think around the country?
Sure.
What do you think that looks like?
Well, here's what I'd say. As you say, they finance everything. They finance think tanks. They finance conservative media. They finance opposition research. They finance bill writing organizations. They finance candidate recruitment, advocacy groups, and even legal centers. All right? But what we also saw in the enemies list is that my national organization, Progress Now, which we're all state-based organizations, was listed as an enemy as well as part of our work. And what we found was Bradley has spent $186 million over the last 5 years, okay, to advance this right-wing agenda. $186 million over the last 5 years. If you take away D.C. think tank spending, 80% of that money went to the states like mine, Wisconsin, the Progress Now states, where we're doing work in the states to fight back against the conservative agenda. To fight this battle, it's going to have to come from the states up, not from, D.C. It's got to come from the states, people talking to the press, people alerting their neighbors, people informing elected officials, both those who are sympathetic to the Bradley cause and those who are opposed to it. That's the way we're going to fight back. After we started exposing Bradley for all the stuff that they were funding, it's apparently how we got on this enemies list, and it changed the dynamic, at least in the way that the media was reporting organizations financed by Bradley. When we started, these think tanks wouldn't even be identified in the media as being conservative, for instance.
Right.
As if they were calling balls and strikes, and that's part of the propaganda program, and why it's so important that however we fight back, whether it's, fighting in the media, doing our own research, doing our own organizing, it's got to come from the states. That's how we fight back. But they're coming to the states. We'll fight back in the states.
Scott Ross, the executive director of One Wisconsin Now. Where can people get involved with your work? OneWisconsinNow.org. Just tell our listeners, especially those in Wisconsin, how you would like them to get involved in this fight.
For sure. A couple things I'd like them to do. First, I'd like them to make sure that they're writing letters to the editor and calling radio shows to alert people about the threat we face and how this was a coordinated strategy from the get-go to try and overtake state government in Wisconsin to enact a right-wing anti-worker, anti-voter, anti-women, anti-LGBT agenda. That's what happened. Second thing they can do is come visit our website, bradleywatch.org, find out more information. We've got research there. And then the third thing is to stay informed. I think those are the three most important things. That's how we fight back.
Scott Ross, Executive Director of One Wisconsin Now. Thank you so much for joining us on the Thom Hartmann Program.
I thank you. Be well.
So this is just a story that because I have at Social Security Works, we have a billionaire, Pete Peterson, who funds most of the efforts to destroy Social Security, and he funds all these different organizations. And the key is understanding that that's how it works, that it's a coordinated network of billionaire ideologues and their money that are trying to just destroy working people in this country. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're going to be taking all your calls on the way out of the show, so stick around. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson filling in, and we're going to go to Rick in West Virginia. You're on the line.
Hey, how you doing, Alex? Yeah, I was listening to that lady commenting earlier about Trump and all that. You know, what it comes down to is that the ultra-right is practicing psychological political warfare. My son is in Black Ops. He's in the military. He's rank and file. He's NCO. You know, the rank and file in the military, they know what's up. And so many people are brainwashed, and they don't even realize the truth. I read an article today we have one, I don't use the word liberal, we have one paper in the state that is not controlled by the right-wing media, and they reprinted an article in today's New York Times about if you were born in 1942, that's if you were born in 42 and you were middle class, you were at the peak of your earning power when you became a wage earner. They have consistently, disinformation, propaganda, every angle, you know, and it's a combination of Wall Street, Madison Avenue, and it started right after World War I, you know, like the bayonets, babies, and all that, and it's just gotten progressively worse. And I firmly believe, and I consider myself spiritual but not religious, that beware the money changers. Greed is destroying our country. And this 1%, they rake in all the money, but yet they don't want to pay the cost. You take Trump, 5 deferments, and he was perfect Vietnam age. Both my kids done multiple tours over there because we believe in this country. These people have hijacked our country. And I remember Kent State. I remember that very well. And it seems like it's come to head. But these people on the right and the ones that buy their Kool-Aid or drink their Kool-Aid, you cannot reason with them. They are so totally brainwashed. I watch all the major channels. I listen to free speech religiously. And if you take it all in, you get to the truth. According to the right, you know, the media is controlled by liberal socialists. That's not true. I mean, we got 6 major media corporations now.
6 corporations own all the media that we consume.
And I wonder how many people know that Carter left the budget in the black. You know, and when Eisenhower was president, he was the last legally elected Republican president. He knew what it was all about. The tax rate for anybody making over $1 million, I believe, was 93%. But yet they want to reap all the benefits, but they don't even want to pay the price.
Rick, thank you so much for your call. You're just right on. That's why I don't have a response. I let you take us out of this segment. So, Rick, you're right. Beware of the 1%. Their greed is a sickness. It knows no bounds. They can't be reasoned with. They won't stop on their own. They can only be defeated. But, Rick, when you and I stand together, that's exactly what's going to happen. And millions of people raising their voices in this country because they see what's going on. So thanks, Rick. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be taking more of your calls right after this. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Austin, filling in for Tom, and I'm going right to the phones. Bert in California, you are on the air.
Yeah, that woman, Sandy, who called earlier, was practicing what I see a lot of moral relativism and a lack of proportionality about things. We saw this yesterday in the hearing. Tom Cruise brought up the fact that Susan Rice was not there. And why should she be there? She had nothing to do with this particular stuff. But Sandy mentioned that Obama is going to get $400,000 for a speech. If my memory serves me correctly, George W. Bush got $2 million, the first speech he gave after he left office in Japan. And I think they really didn't care what subject he talked about. So,
Bert, you're pointing to the selective outrage that is quite common nowadays, or there is a logical fallacy that it is. I'm just blanking on the Latin for it. My brain will bring it up, and what we're seeing over and over again is it's these little nuggets of like derailing information and how to just push this ideological propaganda, and you get it from Fox News or any of these other Breitbart or these other outlets that are just spoon feeding people this propaganda. But it's not only what to think, but also how to see the world and to talk about things so that it is a very narrow world, a very small world. And it is a large part of it is to only be outraged by opponents' behavior. And I think we have to, on the left, we have to actually do a much better job. We have to look at the behavior and condemn it. I don't like that Barack Obama gave speeches on Wall Street. I thought it was tin-eared. Right at this moment, why wouldn't he give a speech to anybody besides Wall Street at this moment? It was a bond firm. But I'm going to be equally outraged at everybody paying court to Wall Street, and I don't care who it is. And Donald Trump is certainly paying court to Wall Street. In fact, he brought their court to town. Goldman Sachs is now in charge of the Treasury. That is outrageous. That is what we should be outraged by. So, Bert, thank you so much for your call. I got 2 more minutes in this segment, and I want to try to get through all of the callers. So stick with us if you're on. I'm going to go to Steve in Virginia. You're on the line.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's great to hear how outraged we are. I'm a systems thinker, and what the next step, if we are so lucky to get to that point, is that we all need to unite, and that's what I'm working on right now, is how do we create mechanisms that we can unite this outrage and make something positive happen. And the way to do that, one of the ways, is that I'm creating 10,000 units across the United States so we can do what we're doing here, but actually create a war board and say, oh, look, here are all the people that are voting on these issues. Now, there is an interesting app that came out, if I may speak of it. It's called Vote Spotter.
In the last minute here.
Yeah, the Vote Spotter will tell you exactly how your elected officials are, what are they voting on, and you can speak to them. You can send them messages. It's called Vote Spotter. The other systems and mechanisms we'll have to discuss in another day because your time is running out. But
Steve, thank you so much for calling in. I'd also point out these distributed organizations like Indivisible, where they're not actually hierarchical in a top-down way. They're actually giving tools to people to empower themselves in a distributed manner across the country, and we're seeing that to great effect with the town halls. And there are also large organizations who are working to bring all of the resistance together in whatever manner it can. And I applaud you, Steve, for your thinking a couple steps ahead. That as the resistance matures, it needs to turn into opposition, and then it needs to continue fighting for our positive vision of the nation that we want to live in and the world that we want to live on. Thanks for your call, Steve. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking more of your calls right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Donut Economics, brand new book by Kate Raworth, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And on page 21 in the Who Wants to Be an Economist chapter, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, here they are. Whether you consider yourself an economic veteran or novice, now is the time to uncover the economic graffiti that lingers in all of our minds. And if you don't like what you find, scrub it out. Or better still,
painted over with new images that far better serve our needs and times. The rest of this book proposes 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist, revealing for each of those 7 ways the spurious image that has occupied our minds, how it has come to be so powerful, and the damaging influence it has had. But the time for mere critique is past, which is why the focus here is on creating new images that capture the essential principles to guide us now. The diagrams in this book aim to summarize that leap from old to new economic thinking. Taken together, they set out, quite literally, a new big picture for the 21st century economist. So here's a whirlwind tour of the ideas and images at the heart of donut economics. First, change the goal. For over 70 years, economics has been fixated on GDP, or national output, as its primary measure of progress. That fixation has been used to justify extreme inequalities of income and wealth, coupled with unprecedented destruction of the living world. For the 21st century, a far bigger goal is needed: meeting the human needs of every person within the means of our life-giving planet. And that goal is encapsulated in the concept of the donut. The challenge now is to create economies, local to global, that help to bring all of humanity into the donut's safe and just space. Instead of pursuing ever-increasing GDP, it's time to discover how to thrive in balance. Second, see the big picture. Mainstream economics depicts the whole economy with just one extremely limited image, the circular flow diagram. Its limitations have furthermore been used to reinforce a neoliberal narrative about the efficiency of the market, the incompetence of the state, the domesticity of the household, and the tragedy of the commons. It is time to draw the economy anew, embedding it within society and within nature and powered by the sun. This new depiction invites new narratives about the power of the market, the partnership of the state, the core role of the household, and the creativity of the commons. Third, nurture human nature. At the heart of 20th century economics stands the portrait of rational economic man. He has told us that we are self-interested, isolated, calculating, fixed in taste, and dominant over nature. And his portrait has shaped who we have become. But human nature is far richer than this. As early sketches of our new self-portrait reveal, we are social, interdependent, approximating, fluid in values, and dependent upon the living world. What's more, it is indeed possible to nurture human nature in ways that give us a far greater chance of getting into the donut's safe and just space. Fourth, get savvy with systems. The ironic crisscross of the market supply and demand curves is the first diagram that every economics student encounters, but it is rooted in misplaced 19th century metaphors of mechanical equilibrium. A far smarter starting point for understanding the economy's dynamism is systems thinking, summed up by a simple pair of feedback loops. Putting such dynamics at the heart of economics opens up many new insights, from the boom and bust of financial markets to the self-reinforcing nature of economic inequality and the tipping points of climate change. It's time to stop searching for the economy's elusive control levers and start rewarding it as an ever-evolving, complex system. Fifth, design to distribute. In the 20th century, one simple curve, the Kuznets curve, whispered a powerful message on inequality. It has to get worse before it can get better, and growth will eventually make it up, or even it up. But inequality, it turns out, is not an economic necessity. It is a design failure. 21st century economists will recognize that there are many ways to design economies to be far more distributive of the value that they generate, an idea best represented as a network of flows. It means that going beyond redistributing income to exploring ways to redistributing wealth, particularly the wealth that lies in controlling land, enterprise, technology, knowledge, and the power to create money. Sixth, create to regenerate. Economic theory has long portrayed a clean environment as a luxury good, affordable only for the well-off. This view was reinforced by the environmental Kuznets curve, which once again whispered that pollution has to get worse before it can get better, and growth will eventually clean it up. But there is no such law. Ecological degradation is simply the result of degenerative industrial design. This century needs economic thinking that unleashes regenerative design in order to create a circular, not linear, economy, and to restore humans as full participants to Earth's cyclical processes of life.
Seventh, be agnostic about growth. One diagram in economic theory is so dangerous that it's actually never drawn, the long-term path of GDP growth. Mainstream economics views endless economic growth as a must, but nothing in nature grows forever, and the attempt to buck that trend is raising tough questions in high-income but low-growth countries. The book, Donut Economics.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and I'm taking host privileges here to call a mulligan on a call from yesterday that I don't think I spent enough time talking about, and it was a very powerful call, and I don't think I did it justice. So I'm going to replay the call today, and then I'm going to redo my answer. So this one is a call from yesterday from Paul on WCPT.com.
Well, I think we need a completely new paradigm shift where, honestly, we don't need to argue that health care is a right. Health care and health is not an insurable commodity. It does not fit the model of insurance unless, and I'll leave it to the Republicans to do this, you are willing to put a finite dollar value on a life. And if they're going to, like your house or your car, and if you're going to do that, let's start with this. Let's not talk about the sanctity of life when a prematurely born baby the care will run into the millions of dollars before this baby can even leave the hospital to go home with lifelong pre-existing conditions. Or on the other end of the spectrum, for instance, my wife, she died of cancer. The last year of her life, she died of breast cancer, the last year of her life was probably the most expensive. Leave it to the Republicans to say, oh, just let her die. We're not going to keep paying to have her in hospice. Just let her die in pain. Let them be the ones to do that. We're not talking about the right, if that's what they want to do, but they argue the sanctity of life. The insurance model does not fit health. The health of a nation is on the cost side of the balance sheet, and it must be paid for before anything else, certainly before military weaponry, which is used to kill people.
Paul, thank you for your call. I'm sorry for your loss, and your call really highlights the immorality of not just Trump Care and what they're trying to do, but in fact our entire for-profit health system. You talked about the loss of your wife from breast cancer and the last year of her life being the most expensive and in hospice care. And there are millions of Americans around this country who experience this devastating loss of a loved one. And that our system, even now, even under Obamacare, that our system in this moment, that all Americans are going to face in one form or another, have to worry about money. It's the exact wrong way of doing healthcare. It is not healthcare. It is a Wall Street designed system that sees people only as money. And you say, don't put a value on a person's life. And that's exactly what our current system does. There are whole teams of actuaries and numbers crunchers who literally spend their time trying to figure out how to pay as little as possible. So is it more, this is going back to before Obamacare. It still happens now. Will happen even more under Trump Care. And it'll continue to happen as long as we have a for-profit healthcare system. That is what I wanted to point out. That is what I missed with your call. When you brought up personally and you had the strength to share your story and to use your loss to kind of personalize how stupid and immoral our system is. that it actually ascribes a dollar figure to life, and that is the root of all of the for-profit health care, which is a misnomer in this country. That is the despicableness of it. So what happens is there are numbers crunchers who figure out it's actually more cost effective to deny paying people, paying for certain care for people, certain treatments, and they say it's not cost effective. And they do this because they know, and you can find this, there have been lawsuits, it's in the public record. They know that if they deny claims, even if they're valid claims, that if they deny them, it is likely the person will die, and it is cheaper for them to wrongfully deny claims. Even if they get sued every once in a while, it's still cheaper to them to do that than it is to actually pay for the insurance that people have paid into. That is what's wrong with our healthcare system, our so-called healthcare system. That is for profit, that there are these parasitic middlemen, insurance companies who just suck money out of the system. And the whole thing is set up not as well care, not to deal with the whole of each person, but only to view us as a vehicle to make money. So until we radically repurpose, revision the healthcare system, we will only have shades of this. We will only be able to restrain some of the bad behaviors of the for-profit health industry. Because as long as we have a for-profit health industry, they will do everything in their power to squeeze every penny out of us that they can. That's why we need healthcare as a right for all Americans, and we need to expand Medicare for everyone. So, Paul, thank you for your call, and everyone, thank you for giving me an opportunity for redoing a call. It's the immorality at the root of the system is that we have a for-profit healthcare system. And we have to remember at the root where the problem is. As long as we have a for-profit healthcare system, it can only be shades of less terrible until we get rid of the entire for-profit healthcare system and make it healthcare as a right, radically revisioning the system. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to take calls all the way out to the show. I'm going to go to Morris in California. Morris, you're on the air.
I got a question for you, my brother. And I don't answer, just resonate on it a little bit. What is an American? And I want to leave everybody with this. Down in Florida, there's a lawsuit going on. Folks want their money back from the Democratic Party because they compromised their charter. They were not fair. And the folks, they gave money to the Democratic Party that were Bernie Sanders supporters. After finding out that Mr. Sanders was not treated fairly, they want their money back. That's called fraud, last time I checked. So I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but look that up, because one thing Mr. Sanders proved, we don't need Wall Street money to compete. And as long as the Democratic Party allows the Wall Street to come through them as a vehicle, the people will suffer. The world we're not going to make it. The homeless population is going to continue to grow. When you ask what is an American, it certainly isn't somebody that goes by St. Matthew's chapter 25, verses 35 through 42, the teachings of Jesus Christ. I thought we were kind of in line with those principles. Now, I'm not sure anymore. But let's all just think about that for a moment. And don't forget that lawsuit down in Florida. All right, thank you.
Morris, thanks so much for your call. At the end of that Matthew citation, which is what you do to the least of us, you do to me. That's that general part in Matthew where, when were you in prison? That whole section. And it is definitely what the alt-Christians mistake. That very simple message in there that resonates across faith traditions, that which you do to the least of us, you do to me. And then there is at the a bit later in Matthew, there's this parable of the servants, and there is the wicked servant who beats and lies and steals and is greedy and avaricious, if that's how you pronounce that word, and mistreats all of the other servants while the master is away. And that is the greedy liars on Wall Street. That is their minions in Capitol Hill. That is anybody who would profit off of the harm and misery of their fellows. That is them. That is that servant. And the end of that one is, you do not know the time when the master will return. And there will be much gnashing of teeth by those servants, the wicked servants. And again, in many faith traditions, these concepts exist. In the humanist tradition, there is, why do we have empathy? Why do we feel bad when we hurt others? Because what we have that makes us us is the ability to see ourselves in others. That is not just a religious teaching. It is a brain chemistry, a consciousness fact that is remarkable, that we can understand, that we can see ourselves in others. And Morris, I do think that your first question of what is an American is a good one. I'm going to just leave that one out there. I hope maybe tomorrow people can think about it. What is an American? And because I have a pretty solid concept of what is un-American. I do. And I think, greedy liars on Wall Street who are willing to watch the world burn as long as they can get one more golden jet ski to drive off of their golden yacht on their way to their golden helicopter. That's not this country. That's not what makes this country. Jimmy in Colorado, you're on the line.
Lone Tree. Yeah, I had a good lesson on that greed. Psychologically, these people are sick. The more they have, the more they want, to the point of self-destruction, even though they know they're going to destroy themselves. They know it, but they have to have it. And I saw this with my parents. They got like $80,000, right, from a piece of land they sold, and they had like $40,000 in credit card bills, and they used to try to give me money, and I don't need it. And then turned around, they got this money, they paid off their credit cards, stuck $40,000 in the bank, and all of a sudden they became greedy. It was like they didn't want to give me a penny. I was helping fix up their house, and I was having to spend my own money to buy the wood and stuff. And I almost had to laugh, but it was a real good lesson on greed. Once they get a little bit of money, it's like, they go crazy, and they don't want to give up a penny. And it's kind of like Aesop's fables, the dog with a bone, he looks in the pond of water and sees a dog with a bigger bone, and he wants that bone, and he drops the bone to grab the other one in the pond of water. So this has been going on for thousands of years, and I just, there's no way we're going to stop their greed. It's going to take something almost to the point of a revolution to do it. We have a maximum income. We got minimum wage. Why not a maximum income? You're not allowed to have more than $1 million a year or something like that. But
Jimmy, I think
I wanted to say, it was a good lesson watching my parents.
I think one of the things that I take from your call, and thank you for it, is that I think there's a tendency, and I think it's born out of a goodness, general decency in the American people. And, I get to go around the country and I get to see it. And it's when you look at giving, and when you look at charitable giving, it's the people who are least able to give who give the most as a percentage of their income. I just like that. That's just true. That's just a fact. And I think in that is it is part of the general decency. And I think there is actually a problem almost from that general decency, is that it's difficult for most people to actually picture and understand a greedy liar on Wall Street, a person who makes $1 billion and still wants more. We have this sort of like belief somewhere that they'll just stop at some point, that greed tapers off, that at some point they'll be satiated and they themselves will take their foot off the gas. And that's just not true. We have history to show us that we cannot believe that to be true, that they, the billionaires, the global plutocrats, cannot be reasoned with to stop their destructive policies that increase inequality, that are ripping this country and world apart. We cannot think that they are going from their perches built of cash going to ease off. We, the people, the decent people, have to oppose and defeat them, and we have to put in place policies. Very simple tax and spend policies. A maximum wage is one. I think a very simple, very American. Thomas Paine proposed it in 1787 or 97, an estate tax. He didn't propose this level. I would propose a massive estate tax. A massive estate tax on estates, and pick a huge number, over $1 billion. A massive estate tax, and then pay for huge infrastructure projects, millions of good-paying jobs around the country, increased minimum wage, expanding Social Security, expanding Medicare for everybody. But it's by policies is how we're going to reverse the income and wealth inequality that we're seeing. It does not happen on its own. It's only through our efforts.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back after this on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, and we're going to go to Jim in Florida. Jim, you're on the air.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say that lady that called up a few callers ago, I actually wanted to hear what her point of view is, because I think she might have a lot of considerations from a lot of people out there. And I think everybody should have a chance to express those, and we need to debate every issue completely. And I thought the way you shut her down was the way right-wing radio hosts shut me down when I called in. I thought it was too abrupt.
I hear you. I just, I don't actually think that you need to allow somebody. I mean, her point was made. I gave her a lot of time. I didn't interrupt any of her first 5 points. It was only when we talked about the Muslim ban that I don't think that actually debating a person's humanity is necessary. I don't think that that there is anything that is, reasonable about that debate. And I don't think that she was calling into this show to actually have a debate. She was calling into the show to, just propagandize on her point. But Jim, I hear what you're saying, and, I always like criticism, constructive criticism. So I thought I gave her a fair amount of time to make her point. And I only started replying when we got to debating people's humanity, because that's where I don't think we need to actually enter into that debate.
Well, the first thing is let me say I'm not directed that to you. I direct that question to all of us, because I think we all should be engaged. But I think that whole problem that she was talking about is so far complex. Maybe she's coming at it from just one angle that's not right. But that is a complicated issue, because I mean you almost have to have a series of really learned people in that area of social or cultural anthropology and sociology to know the dynamics of introducing a group of people into a society. You just don't open up the doors and let people flood in here. There's other questions, like there's 50 Muslim countries. How many of them are opening up their doors to refugees?
I mean, have you Googled it?
I Googled it.
See, what I hear, Jim, is that you actually agree with her in some level, even though,
No. I'm saying
there's been Muslims here since there's been Muslims here since the country was formed, right? So you're
I'm not saying don't. I'm saying let's discuss the issue completely.
Yeah, but you don't discuss the issue completely when it comes to a person's humanity. Like, you don't enter into a debate. If you believe in chattel slavery, I don't try to debate you on whether a human being can be held in bondage as a product. I defeat you in that. So when it comes to debating a person's humanity, that is not a liberal thing to enter into that discourse and hear all sides. When it comes to a person's humanity, their worth and dignity, that is a fact, and that is a starting point. We'll be right back on the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back, the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, filling in for Tom, closing out the show today on Tuesday. I'll be back again tomorrow and for the rest of the week. I'm sorry for the callers who I didn't get to today. I'm going to be taking a lot of your calls for the rest of the week. I love doing this show because I get to hear from so many of you all around the country, and I always have this balance. I want to bring in interesting guests and talk about all the stories that are important, but I also want to hear from you. And, if I didn't get to your call and you're on Twitter, send me a tweet or call back tomorrow. I really want to spend a lot of time this week, as Congress is in recess, figuring out this relay race of a resistance that we're in. How can we take this distributed, disaggregated resistance that's all over? How can we take that and turn it into a movement for change that doesn't only defeat the Trump proposals, that defeat the McConnell and Ryan proposals to hand our country over to the billionaires on Wall Street? Not only defeating that, but then continuing in this movement to get money out of politics, to defeat the billionaires on Wall Street and build the country that we want to live in and the world that we want to live on. So I want to hear from you. How do we build this movement? You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Alex Lawson, and I'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets. And they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.